Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Trollhunters Tales of Arcadia. Okay, so this episode, Creepslayerz, is essentially a part B to the previous episode, Just Add Water. Essentially, this is the side B of the episode, and is as the episode as alluded to last time, is the other side of the story that we didn't see previously, like explaining a lot of the weirdness regarding Steve and Eli that comes up in the previous episode, and and also some of the other weird details of the episode themselves. When you realize that that's what the episode's setting up, it's kind of obvious, but essentially, the episode does follow two characters that we have spent a lot of time with up until this point, but haven't really gotten to know all that well. Steve and Eli. So, essentially, this episode is about them, becoming friends over a school project. And the episode also reveals that this is like that Steve has been kind of in the background, kind of suspected that something's weird's been going on. This is the episode where he officially finds out that there is more to his hometown of Arcadia Oaks than he originally believed. But in case, that is how the episode starts. We actually meet Steve in his house, and Steve is currently in the process of taking the trash out after snapping at his mother about how he's doing homework and doesn't want to. But she admits that she tells him that's not an excuse, because she can hear the TV in his room and knows he's probably not doing homework because she can hear video game noises. So he immediately goes outside to take care of the trash and becomes obviously very visibly upset that he has to do so. At which point we find out that Coach Lawrence is actually staying with him in his house, which of course then proceeds to explain a couple of things that I'll get to in a minute. But yeah, essentially, Coach Lawrence comes out to talk to Steve, admitting that while he's trying to do the trash, telling him that wasn't cool, and that his mom didn't deserve that kind of sass. Essentially, he tells Steve that just because his father's no longer in the house doesn't mean his hostility needs to be, and openly admits that it's going to be a new thing for both of them, and that things are going to be better without Steve's dad around, and does offer that if he ever needs somebody to talk to, that he's always willing to hug it out. But of course, Steve proceeds to rebuff him and shoves a trash bag into his arms instead. And of course, Coach Lawrence is upset, telling him that he's that to just fine be that way. At which point he helps Steve put the trash away and goes back inside. And of course, Steve is currently struggling to get the lid on the trash can when suddenly he hears a noise coming from his garage, from his mom's garage. So he immediately, and believing it to be a raccoon, he immediately grabs his phone, pulls it out, turns on the lights, and immediately climbs inside. And he does hear something crawling around in the garage, but currently does not have any real idea of what it is. So he but he does believe that it's just some sort of harmless raccoon. So of course he closes the door behind him to keep it trapped inside while he deals with it. But quickly discovers it's not a raccoon. As it turns out, Frogwa somehow got into Steve's garage and is monkeying around in there. Not entirely sure what, but Steve, as you might expect, quickly panics when he realizes that what he's dealing with is not a raccoon. So he of course in the process drops his phone, but he does manage to eventually trap Frogwa underneath a laundry basket, and then wonders what exactly it is he's looking at. So of course, the next day, this is where we kind of get back into the the original plot of the episode. But the Steve, we find out, is in a bit of a panicked frenzy when he comes into school. Someone actually comments him on a play he did during one of his games, and Steve, of course, is just too preoccupied with his thoughts to pay attention to him, so he just walks right past him and ignores him, much to the kid's chagrin, unfortunately. But eventually, he comes into class again, as Toby is currently working on putting the face on his little sack of flour friend. But in the process winds up of course, as we were establishing, accidentally causes Toby to puncture a hole in it. at which point he sits down, again, very visibly rattled and preoccupied with his thoughts, and, of course, his Coach Lawrence tells him that he's happy that Steve could join them, in a very sarcastic tone, and, Steve admits that he's sorry that he's late, pointing out that it's been weird. And of course, that's at this point where Coach Lawrence tells him that it's about to be even weirder, explaining that he's going to be raising a baby with Pepperjack, which of course forces the two of them to become, you know, to work on the project with each other. But this winds up working out in Steve's advantage. So of course, Eli is currently currently putting a face on their baby. And he's currently standing outside a locker. When suddenly Steve comes up to him and tells him that he needs to actually talk with him. And of course, this causes Eli to immediately assume the worst because, you know, up until this point, their relationship has just been Steve shoves Eli in locker for saying something stupid and weird, and proceeds to just walk off and bully him. But no, and of course, immediately to kind of skip right to the end of that. Eli then proceeds to start crawling inside a locker, but Steve tells him that that's not what he's there for, admitting that it's not about the school assignment or anything else, and that he actually has something that he needs to show Eli and talk to him about with monster about. And it's at this point where Coach Lawrence shows up, and of course Steve immediately pulls Eli out of the locker, pointing out that he's not bullying him, he's just trying to talk to him. You know, do the whole assignment thing. But of course, Coach Lawrence isn't there to talk to him about that, or at least not right now. And does tell him that he's actually planning to that admits that while they do share a house, he doesn't appreciate that Steve is coming in late to his classes. And of course, Steve tells him that it won't happen again. At which point, Coach Lawrence proceeds to embarrass Steve in front of the school by admitting that he's also going to be going shopping and wondering if he wants to pick up those extra strength pimple pads that Steve uses, implying that Steve does not naturally have clear skin. But and of course Steve just mumbles that would be great without, you know, kind of trying to draw a scene. But of course Coach Lawrence proceeds to walk off, and Eli is of course amused about the fact that Coach Lawrence is dating Steve's mom. But Steve tells him that if Eli ever breathes a word of it to anybody, that he will spend the rest of his life in a locker. And of course, this causes Eli to admit that his lips are sealed. But in case, Steve points out that they got a little off topic. At which point, he proceeds to explain what exactly it is he needs to talk about, and wonders if what Eli said about the monsters and everything else he said at the debut episode of the series were true. And of course, Eli is a little confused as to why Steve would want to talk to him about that, but Steve admits that he just has something that he needs to show him, and that he will come by their house, that he'll come by his house later to confirm some things. At which point, but of course, this is this point where as Steve is walking off, Eli, of course, immediately asks him what the baby should be called, but to which Steve responds, "I don't give a flip." And sure enough, that's what the baby is called, Flip. So, yeah, in case Eli is in his room, currently referring to little Flip as to how they're going to have his quote-unquote father over. But does admit that in the meantime, it's his job to take care of him, and he'll take the assignment. He's going to take the assignment very seriously. So, and of course, it's at this point where Eli's mom calls to him, telling him that he has a friend coming over, and of course Eli tries to admit that he's not coming over to, you know, hang out for like dinner or anything, and that he's just there for school, because his mom is insistent that she set another table setting. But of course, Eli in the process winds up accidentally mouthing off to his mom, so she gets mad at him, and he apologizes him and refers to him by his full name of Eli Leslie Pepperjack, which you know, he admits he's sorry, and just tells his mom to send Steve to his room, because he knows it's Steve at this point. And of course, Steve then proceeds to come up, and of course, immediately admits that seems like they both have a secret, since he didn't know that Eli's middle name was Leslie. So, of course, it is at this point where Steve then proceeds to try and tell him what he wants to tell Eli, but Eli, of course, is busy trying to tell Steve that he's actually, he knows they're not going to really want to interact with each other, so he's trying to point out a parenting schedule so that they can actually have minimal interaction with each other. But Steve admits that he's not really worried about the assignment right now, and that he has something far more important that he needs to bring up. And of course, It's at this point where he takes out his backpack, and the backpack opens itself. And after a few seconds, Frogwa climbs out of the backpack and starts scurrying around Eli's room. And of course, Eli is visibly impressed that Steve managed to catch one, which of course causes Steve to realize that Eli knows what this thing is, and most likely understands that this is something he could actually understand. And of course, in the process, Frogwa winds up picking up a a children's spelling toy that Eli has, and starts fiddling with it to try and figure out what it does. And of course, it's at this point where Eli then proceeds to pull down his space poster that's on the one wall of his room to reveal a massive corkboard conspiracy chart thing. You know the one. It's just this big corkboard where Eli explains that he's been experimenting with all of the things. He essentially has been keeping a careful eye on Arcadia and all the weird things that happen, but admits that he's never had any concrete proof until now. But and of course he suspects that there's a bunch of weird things going on, pointing out that he's noticed a lot of monsters and other things, as well as also wizards ? Which he has written there, and he's right. That'll come up at a later date. But he has definitely noticed some weird things. Eli admits that he's been noticing a lot of weird things, and admits that he's been trying for ages to find proof. And ultimately, the thing that set him off and kind of made him realize that there might be something more was obviously the battle between Kanjigar and Bular. Obviously, that was the thing that ultimately was like, hey, there's more. I think I have actual proof now. I'm gonna see if I can start cataloging proof and everything. And that has been an arc for Eli throughout most of the series up until this point. It happens a lot in the background, but he has been trying to catalog, all the strange things that happen in Arcadia, because and this is something Eli openly brings up, and of course Steve admits that he points out that why Eli hasn't told him any of this before, hasn't told anybody any of this. At which point Eli matter-of-factly points out that he did, and Steve shoved him in a locker for it. So at which point Eli continues, and this is the point I was trying to get back to, is that Eli admits that he understands that there's a bunch of weird stuff going on in Arcadia, but doesn't understand why nobody else seems to know where the strange stuff comes from. In fact, he admits that most people seem to be completely oblivious to it, and does wonder why nobody in Arcadia outside of him knows, which of course causes him to realize that there must be somebody at the center of it trying to cover it all up and keep people from finding out. At which point, Frogwa uses the spell check toy to spell out Jim's name, which of course causes Steve and Eli to be a little confused, with Eli pointing out that could be any Jim, but then Frogwa presses the button for L, which goes L is for lake, which of course causes Eli to realize that Jim might be behind it. But which of course he points out doesn't make any sense considering Jim is a good person and knows full well that he wouldn't hurt anybody. Even admitting that Jim is probably one of the only people in this entire school who's actually nice to him and likes having him around. So and of course Steve obviously does not like Jim very much. So he obviously immediately latches onto the idea that, yeah, Jim might be a bad guy. He knew that Jim was a fraud of some sort, and understands that it's clear that he understood something clearly was going on with Jim, and then proceeds to explain that there was something going on in the woods, about how obviously Jim is hiding something, and Claire and Toby are in on it. So he admits that they're going to need to figure out a way to expose Jim and figure out how to do that. And the best thing they decide to do is immediately go to the police. And first things first, they lock Frogwa up in a cat carrier and put him in the back of Eli's mom's car, which Eli isn't particularly happy about. He openly admits that his mom is probably not going to be particularly happy about the fact that they stole her car. And of course, Steve points out that they're not stealing it; they're borrowing it for emergency purposes. Pointing out that, and then proceeds to explain the plan about how, since he understands Claire and Toby are in on what's going on, he admits that they probably can't go to them with what they found. So his next bet is to go to the police with Frogwa and have him explain what's going on. And of course, Frogwa obviously has no interest in doing that, because obviously Frogwa's a bad guy. He's obviously trying to do something shady in the back. He's doing something shady in the background. He's trying to bring Gunmar out into the world and try to start the Eternal Night, you know. Obviously, you don't want to go to the police for that, for a myriad of reasons. So obviously, when Frogwa hears Steve's plan, he starts freaking out inside the cage, and Eli immediately assumes that Frogwa doesn't seem like he's going along with his plan after hearing it. At which point, he does ask Steve if the cage is actually secure, but and Steve admits that he locked it himself. But then they hear that the cage rattle on the floor, and suddenly Frogwa winds up attacking them in the front of the car. And this is where it cuts back into the episode where, in the process, Frogwa accidentally activates the radio while trying to fight Steve and Eli. And in the process, they wind up driving past Jim and his friends while they're in the midst of fighting the Gruesome. And obviously, they don't see anything, but of course, Jim doesn't suspect that Eli and Steve had something else going on. At this point, they don't know anything about that. So yeah, obviously they don't know there's a whole B side of this going on. But of course, it's at this point where Steve and Eli Steve and Eli wind up accidentally crashing the car after Frogwa uses Eli's mom's pepper spray to pepper spray them both in the face and jumps out the window to escape. Which, of course, obviously since they can't see, they crash the car. So of course, this causes them to realize that they need to figure out what's going on. That Steve, of course, realizes that now that they have no proof, they only really had the one lead to go off of, which is, of course, the fact that Jim has something to do with it. And while Eli is more so distressed about the fact that Steve wrecked his mom's car, and rightfully so, his mom's probably going to kill him when she finds out. He admits that they're right and that they should continue going onward, but also wonder what's going on with his mom's car. At which point Steve hollers back that he doesn't give a flip. At which point they go to Jim's house. And while that's all happening, we actually do see a B side of what's going on with with Dictatious. We do find out that in the episode it's revealed that Dictatious developed sight in the previous episode. And this episode explains how he did that, and the end result is that he actually kind of didn't. So going into kind of like the side thing of this, where they explore it, we do find out that obviously we've already found out that Otto does not like Dictatious very much, and is trying to replace him. And it's at this point where he proceeds to tell him very matter of factly, by proceeding to trip Dictatious while he's just trying to walk through the changeling base. And of course, Dictatious is angry about Otto for tripping him, but and Otto proceeds to explain, and Dictatious proceeds to explain that he understands fully what Otto is trying to do. He knows that he thinks Dictatious is useless now, and is trying to replace him as head counsel. And of course, Otto does confirm that not so subtly that he is trying to do that, pointing out that obviously he understands that Dictatious no longer has a working set of eyes, and points out that obviously even though Dictatious admits that he's been at Gunmar's side for 1,000 years, Otto explains that he's not exactly as useful as he could be to Gunmar right now due to him being blind. So he goes on to explain that once Gunmar figures that out, and then he makes a killing motion, which of course Dictatious is blind and doesn't see, so Otto has to explain what he just did. So, and of course, at this point where Dictatious then proceeds to point out that he's not going to tolerate this, and neither is his Dark Lord, pointing out that if Gunmar finds out that Otto has threatened him, they'll never work with him again. But he trails off when he discovers that Otto has since left and realizes that he's talking to himself. And realizing he's no longer safe, he tries to leave the changeling base, but quickly discovers that only the other changelings are against order to talk to him, which of course infuriates him because he realizes that he's not going to be able to ask anybody to find the exit. And this, of course, infuriates him when he realizes that Otto was once again meddling to try and keep him from escaping his quote-unquote fate. But it's this point where, as he's leaving, he discovers that he listens to a between Otto and one of the other changelings, and And of course, they find out that what we find out is that the lady who usually speaks through the that usually speaks through the gramophone and gives them advice has eerily gone silent and no longer speaks through the gramophone, which of course causes Otto to become upset, especially since now more than ever they need her guidance. But he calms himself in German and then proceeds to explain that they'll just have to make do without her and that they'll just have to trust her guidance for now. So for the time being, he just trusts that the pale lady knows what she's talking about. At which point Dictatious comes with a brilliant idea, and then proceeds to claim that she has blessed him with sight, which of course obviously causes Gunmar to believe that he's now a prophet of some sort, when in actuality he's just putting on a facade to preserve his own life. But in case meanwhile, Steve and Eli arrive at Jim's house, and obviously they're crawling around the bushes and are listening to the basement, or trying to see through the basement, and they of course quickly realize that Steve quickly realizes that they're in over their heads, because they quickly discover, Blinky, Arg, and Droll in the basement, and obviously Steve is annoyed with Eli about the fact that they have not, that obviously Eli didn't tell him that they get that big. But of course, Eli just admits that they do come in all shapes and sizes, and that there's no one size fits all. But of course, they were thinking that they could easily take out Jim in the meantime. But they do start listening in on the conversation, and obviously, as we established, they're playing a role-playing game in the basement. And Steve, here's the very aggressive language and conversation that they use. So he assumes that they're planning some sort of war and not actually playing any sort of board game, because they can't really see around Arg's big frame to see the board game itself. So it's very funny, but of course Steve and Eli quickly have to duck out of the way to quickly get out of the way of Jim's mom coming home, because they realize that she's going to check up on her son. I didn't mention that, but she does check up on her son at one point. And and of course they have to hide from her. But they quickly realize that something obviously is going on. That Jim seems to be preparing some sort of invasion. So they do point out, and they do admit that they're going to need to prepare for that. So at which point they hear more of the conversation and do discover that something is clearly going on in the rock show. But and at which point the audio is kind of just like an abbreviation of the entire conversation that happens in the other episode. So we hear kind of bits and pieces of it sped up, which is, makes sense. It makes perfect sense why. But of course, Steve is very visibly confused as to what's going on in the rock show, and worried that the invasion might be happening tonight. He quickly becomes very alarmed. So, but of course they realize that they need to, prepare for that. So, and realizing that they're going to be in very big trouble if Jim does decide to plan the invasion, do decide to go back to the house to suit up. At which point Eli reveals that he actually has the perfect plan for this, revealing that he has an entire arsenal of weapons and other things that he was planning for just such an occasion, full of ninja throwing stars, bottle rockets, bats, and a bunch of other things that Eli has just been stockpiling, including rolly shoes, which he admits his mom wouldn't let him anywhere near because they're too dangerous, but he winds up wearing them anyway and admits that it's an emergency, he kind of needs them. At which point they wind up dressing up in a special outfit consisting of mostly black with a helmet and grease-based sport paint, which of course is this point where they start pointing out that they look cool, but also they start trying to think workshop names to actually call themselves, and eventually Steve is the one to actually come, and of course Eli suggests one that I forget, and Steve admits that's not particularly good, so he has Eli look in the mirror and admits that they're just two cool looking dudes, and admits that they're called the Creepslayerz with a Z, which is where the name of the episode comes from. But in any case, after doing a bit of majestic posing in the mirror for a minute to admire themselves and show off the gun show, as it were, it's at this point where they admit where Steve admits that they should probably save the world, and drags Eli off, who is still very much showing off in the mirror. and they proceed to go straight to the museum. And it's this point where they have actually prepared a concoction to take care of Jim, which Eli admits is all of the different weaknesses that any sort of, you know, mythological creature could have. Obviously, you got silver. You've got what is it, garlic powder, which I should mention. There's a bit of a misnomer with garlic and vampires, because essentially vampires aren't really afraid of garlic. They're more so afraid of the garlic plant than the garlic bulb. I should admit that. And also, since, you know, eating garlic doesn't really provide any sort of defense against them, because it's mostly a spirit-based defense anyway. I feel like we got our wires crossed somewhere. I just do want to admit that garlic does not work on vampires, like at all. But in any case, with their new concoction in hand, Eli and Steve then proceed to come up with their plan. Eli will try and get all the people out of the museum, while Steve goes to take care of Jim. And of course, they immediately go to set out to do that. Steve tries to hide behind a pillar, and when he sees Jim, and tries to dump the concoction onto Jim, but when Jim is completely unfazed by it, he is obviously very visibly confused about that at first, but then grumbles that, and once again, this gives more context to why Steve suddenly dumped the drink on Jim, but of course, he admits that he ruined his quote-unquote protein shake, which we know was an anti-monster away drink, and proceeds to wander rumble off. Meanwhile, Eli is currently trying to figure out how to deal with you know, Jim and everything, how to deal with the Jim by getting everybody out so that they can actually deal with him. And of course, Eli is having no success, because obviously everybody understands that he both does not work at the museum and is also a kid. So they understand that he can't really do anything of any sort of authority to shut him down. And eventually, after talking to the several people and getting increasingly nervous that their plan isn't working and he may need to come up with a plan B, he quickly discovers, you know, the gruesome. He accidentally pokes it, trying to warn it that it needs to leave. But when he discovers that's the gruesome itself, he tries to fight it and fails miserably. And of course, at this point where Steve tries to come in and tries to figure out how to fight it, but when they quickly discover that they have no real way of knowing how to kill this thing, they immediately run off and realize they need to formulate some sort of plan. So they do proceed to start with a plan. Plan B. Obviously, Steve is going to try and figure out if they can bring somebody in to, you know, stop the gruesome, or rather, he's going to see if he can find a way to get rid of the gruesome and look into its weaknesses. But while Eli tries to evacuate everybody and get it out, since they're obviously get them all out, since they're obviously not prepared for it. So the plan kind of continues as normal. But and of course, Eli eventually does figure out how to get everybody out by setting off the fire alarm, which is why the fire alarm suddenly goes off in the episode without any seeming explanation in the original episode. Turns out Eli set it off. Nobody knew Eli set it off, and so it just kind of seemingly comes out of nowhere. But it is admittedly just artificial conflict in the original episode, but here they actually explain it, and now it makes more sense. Meanwhile, Steve retreats to the bathroom to kind of calm himself and tries to figure out how they're actually supposed to deal with the gruesome when he hears the gruesome itself slink into the bathroom after him, which gives context to why the gruesome suddenly meandered off to the bathroom. Steve and Eli fought it previously, and it chased after Steve. So, but in case Steve proceeds to hide in one of the stalls to get away from the gruesome, when he suddenly hears Jim come into the bathroom after him and starts calling out to the gruesome. And it's at this point where the scene kind of plays from Steve's perspective, where Jim fought the gruesome valiantly, and Steve is revealed to have watched the whole thing. And of course, this causes Steve to realize that Jim is actually a good guy, and they've got it wrong, because he sees Jim valiantly battle the gruesome, and realizes that whatever Jim's at the center of is probably nothing evil or sinister. So, meanwhile, Eli, who by this point believes that Jim is in fact sinister, is planning to, you know, whack him in the head and take him out permanently. But of course, Steve eventually emerges from the bathroom after the battle, and quickly realizes that they had it all wrong and that Jim's a good guy, but realizing he needs to stop Eli, he immediately goes to find him, and sure enough, Eli has since grabbed a mace and is about to whack Jim in the back of the head with it, which, yeah. So of course, Steve grabs him, pulls him aside, and explains that though it makes him visibly nauseous, he does eventually force himself to say that he realized they were wrong and that Jim was a good guy. Although he doesn't like admitting it. The fact that Jim might be better than he thinks he is does make him nauseous. But of course, realizing that, and of course, this causes the two of them to realize that something that they may need to reevaluate their whole plan of it, and does explain that Steve from now on does need to think a little bit more about before assuming something about somebody. While Eli admits that he's definitely going to need to think twice before he decides to whack someone in the back of the head with a mace. So, and of course, the two go to leave the museum when suddenly they see the gruesome, and it proceeds to they proceed to hide behind the display of the troll arm, while the gruesome climbs on top of it and starts devouring the troll arm itself. And of course, Steve and Eli immediately panic because they realize that they're likely in trouble because the gruesome is likely going to try and devour their faces. They don't know that the gruesome only eats troll remains, but they don't know that. So obviously they assume the worst, but then wonders how they're actually supposed to deal with it when they quickly realize that what Jim's plan is to deal with the gruesome. They quickly discover that they've recruited Toby to throw his sack of flour, and when they realize that that's how they were planning to deal with the gruesome, and remembering what happened in the bathroom, it's at this point where Steve then proceeds to pull out their baby Flip. Which, of course, Eli is surprised that Steve has it, but Steve admits that he knows that Eli was taking it seriously and decided to shoulder the load for it. At which point they decide to throw Flip at the gruesome, which destroys it and explains how Toby's baby wound up surviving. Obviously, you know, it wasn't his baby that did the actual sacrificing, and that now explains where Steve and Eli's baby went. So, in case, with all of that said and done, they then proceed to return back to Steve then proceeds to drive off on his Vespa and drops Eli off at his house, and admits that it's sad, that he is a little bit sad that the adventure is over. But they do admit that, but of course Eli admits that it's only for now, admitting that for the time being, now that they know that Jim is a good guy and they obviously need to get more of the facts straight and need to figure out more about what's going on with him. They do admit that when the time comes, Jim might need them for allies and might need somebody to you know, cover his back other than just Claire and Toby. And of course, this causes Steve to perk up a little bit because he realizes now that that means he might get to be an undercover superhero, which is cool. But in case at this point where Eli then proceeds to go into a fist bump with Steve, but they do their whole. They do actually develop their own little secret handshake of Creepslayerz, which is really fun. But of course, it's real that now that Eli admits that now that they've been through all this, they've become friends, and Steve admits that yes, they are friends now, but also admits that as undercover superheroes, they can't let anybody else know that they're secretly best friends. So he proceeds to mockingly to do a fake slug in the arm with Eli. And calls him a turd out loud as he drives off. Which Eli is happy about the fact that he has in fact made a friend, even if he can't, you know, openly admit to it. At which point he proceeds to return home, where his mom obviously gets angry at him for riding on Steve's Vespa, wondering what's going on, and of course they do get into a bit of a screaming match. At which point his mom does in fact wonder where her car is. So yeah. Obviously this episode is, well, the B-side to the previous episode. But this episode does reveal a lot of things about Steve and Eli's home life, as well as a lot of things about Eli personality-wise, as well as kind of explaining Steve a little bit personality-wise. It's implied in this episode that Steve's biological father was emotionally manipulative, which explains why Steve has such a you know, better than you complex. Why he thinks he's better than everybody else. He's recovering from the fact that his father did not like him very much and constantly made him feel like he was worthless or nothing. It's heavily implied. So, and of course we also find out a little bit that Eli lives alone with his mom, and she is a little bit overprotective of him. And also Eli, in turn, has a bit of difficulty with not raising his voice with her. Sometimes he forgets, and they get into a screaming match because of it. But overall, she does want to keep him safe because Eli, of course, unfortunately, we find out that Eli is just... Obviously, Eli is not a particularly, strapping young lad. He's a nerd. Let's be perfectly honest. He's a bit strong. He's scrawny. And obviously, as we find out in a little bit more of this episode, Eli is a bit of a conspiracy nut. That's the main thing of the episode. Eli's a conspiracy nut. He loves latching onto like unsolved mysteries or things like that. And the fact that he lives in a town where the biggest unsolved mystery that persists throughout the entire series exists right under his feet is obviously the biggest mystery of all for him to solve. He's obviously he's obviously very much trying to solve it. But we also find out he also has trust issues because he immediately tries to attack Jim. Even though Jim was nothing but nice to him, and he initially is very understanding of him, but when he gets contradictory efforts for that, he turns on Jim and tries to kill him with a mace. So not great. But yeah, this episode, and obviously we understand that Coach Lawrence is dating Steve's mom, which does go on to explain a little bit from the from the Spring Fling King episode where Steve won. This episode further implies that Coach Lawrence might have rigged the votes because obviously he's trying to endear himself to his, and we find out later that he winds up becoming Steve's stepdad. So he's trying to endear himself to his future stepson, which explains quite a bit. But yeah, and overall, and also obviously this episode brings up a lot of new revelations that explains some things in the previous episode that went unexplained, like why the fire alarm suddenly goes off. Why are Steve and Eli suddenly in a car? Why is Toby and Darcy's baby miraculously okay? Small little things like that are kind of implied to have a deeper meaning, but also never fully explained in the episode themselves. And that's why, if you look at the previous episode, you know that there's a lot of things in there that obviously are supposed to be unexplained because they were planning to explain them here. So, yeah. But in any case, this episode is a lot of fun. I enjoyed it quite a bit because I like Steve and Eli as characters. And this episode is kind of the episode that made me like them a little bit more because obviously up until this point, Steve is kind of a particularly bit of a one-note character. He's very much obviously a bully who likes to pick on Jim for no particular reason other than Jim is kind of better than him. And any seeming signs of the fact that there's a deeper or facet to his character, Steve kind of plays it off of the fact that I was only pretending to be a deeply faceted character. But no, this episode kind of confirms that yeah, Steve does have hidden depth to him that the episode kind of explores, but that the previous episodes kind of explore, but does confirm that those were genuine moments and not just, oh, I was only pretending to be a cocky bastard. But in any case, yeah, this episode does make me like Steve a little bit more, and he's probably one of my favorite characters from the series because of that. Like he grows up a lot throughout the series, and I do like that. And I also like learning a little bit more about Eli and how he's a little bit, well, nuts. But in any case, that's going to do it for my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. Or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. I would appreciate that. Please go check that out and help support me. I would appreciate that. Be sure to go and check out my Twitch. I stream Saturdays and Sundays over there as well as over here, so please go check those out. And also, be sure to go check out my Discord. I hang out over there sometimes. Please go do that. I would appreciate that. Also, be sure and go and check out the videos linked in the end screen as well. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So please go check both of those out. I would appreciate that. That helps support me a lot. And also, be sure to go and check out my Patreon as well. Again, it's also linked in the end screen or down in the description. Please go check that out because it does help support me. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!